Thus was born the Harrier, originally the name chosen for the ill-fated P-1154, and still today the world's only practical vertical takeoff aircraft. It first flew in 1966 and entered service with the RAF in 1969. In America, there was opposition in Congress to spending taxpayers' money on foreign aircraft of such revolutionary concept. However, the U.S. Marine Corps was progressively won around by the unique capabilities of the aircraft. In 1963, Hawker Aircraft Limited ceased to operate and became instead HSA Kingston, a direct subsidiary of the Hawker Siddeley Group. Sir Tom Sopwith resigned as chairman of the group, aged 75, handing over to Sir Roy Dobson, but remaining on the board. Sir Sidney Cam, aged 70, was appointed Director of Design for the whole of Hawker Siddeley Aviation, and it was thought he might leave the Kingston office. His response? "O ye of little faith." Cam found himself increasingly out of sympathy with the times and had nothing but scorn for program management, PERT, and mainframe computers that had become the norm. Despite the changes, the company was still one which valued loyalty and long service. At this ceremony, Cam said, "I wonder how much this continuity of employment has contributed to the success of the firm. In these days of planning, how much is allowed for that? Supposing work people had ebbed and flowed, would we have been where we are today? I doubt it." Although he had long handed over the design baton to the younger men, Cam never retired. Still passionate about the appearance of his aircraft, on the day before he died he had argued fiercely with John Fozzard over the bloody unnatural kink in the leading edge of the Harrier tailplane. The following day, the 12th of March 1966, during his Saturday round of golf at Richmond, he collapsed and died. During his lifetime he was responsible for some 52 designs and some 27,000 aeroplanes, an achievement that will never again be matched. Sir Thomas Sopwith gave the address at his memorial service at St Clement Danes. He said, "Undoubtedly he was the greatest designer of fighter aircraft the world has known. Ever since we have been together he has had only one aim in life, aviation. He had a wonderful character, forceful to a degree when he believed he was right, but always willing to listen to argument, and to admit on those rare occasions when he was wrong." May we recall the immortal words of Winston Churchill speaking in the House of Commons after those fateful days of the Battle of Britain. "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." And may we take it a stage further and remember that those gallant few could not have won that battle without the genius of one man, Sidney Cam, who designed the principal tool to finish the job. On behalf of us all I say, thank you, Sidney. Sidney Cam did not live to see the triumph of his revolutionary aircraft on the world stage, but it can legitimately be seen as his legacy. Sir Thomas Sopwith viewed it with amazement and said, "The Harrier is the greatest stride in the development of all our aircraft." And Cam would also have been pleased, after so many years of struggle, to see a full programme of works at Kingston. No more was the factory reconditioning Hunters, but building state-of-the-art aircraft. In 1969, the Harrier pulled off a great coup when it won the London to New York leg of the Daily Mail Transatlantic Air Race, held to commemorate the first successful crossing 50 years earlier by Alcock and Brown. The Harrier, taking off from a disused coal yard at St Pancras, beat the faster RAF Phantom. The victory dispelled any final doubts that Congress had concerning the aircraft's viability. The Harrier was acquired by the U.S. Marine Corps in 1971, where it was redesignated the AV-8A, the first foreign-built aircraft to be bought by the U.S. military since 1918. It was later bought by the Spanish Navy, who called it the Matador. Almost uniquely for a post-war British military aircraft, the Harrier was delivered on time and on cost. A two-seater version of the Harrier was developed, which also sold around the world. The extra seat for pilot training and the aircraft could be used operationally when needed. There was a company demonstrator which toured the world, marketing the aircraft in front of exotic backdrops, and allowed influential people to experience its unique capabilities. By the late 1960s, it had become impossible for a single British company to get an order for frontline fighters. It was noted, however, in Kingston that the Folland Gnat jet trainer was coming to the end of its working life. John Fozzard and Ralph Hooper, now chief engineer, agreed that the company's main line of development should continue to be VSTOL aircraft, but that there were good financial reasons to develop a jet trainer. The Hawk, designed under the leadership of Ralph Hooper, started as a private venture in advance of a formal government requirement and won a competition for a new RAF advanced trainer. It became a highly successful trainer and light combat aircraft. The BAE Systems Hawk is still being built in 2012. The aircraft was developed in record time and was delivered to the RAF within 2 years of its first flight in 1974. It is used as the basis for its flying training system and to train pilots in the use of advanced weapons systems. In company tradition, the Hawk was a huge commercial success and sold to 19 countries, the largest order being from the US Navy, who made it their standard advanced trainer. However, it was also the last design to emanate from Kingston and the last entirely British military aircraft. As such, it marks the end of the line for the UK as an independent force in military aircraft. Since then, all new RAF types have been the result of international collaborations. In 1977, the Labour government went ahead with its manifesto commitment to nationalise the British aircraft industry. Opponents of the Aircraft and Shipbuilding Act questioned what benefit political direction and increased state control would bring to businesses that were in profit. However, after a stormy passage through the House of Commons, the bill was passed, and Hawker Siddeley were paid off. Lord Beswick became the first chairman of the new nationalised industry, a political appointee as opposed to an industrialist with long experience in the field. Under the terms of the Act, both Hawker Siddeley Aviation and the British Aircraft Corporation were combined into one vast concern known as British Aerospace. Thus, all Britain's once numerous independent aircraft companies finally disappeared, and the name of Harry Hawker passed into history. Sir Thomas Sopwith, now nearly 90 and retired to his country estate, said, "Nationalisation was unnecessary and counterproductive. Nothing can replace the thrust of free enterprise and the exciting stimulus of private venture." British Aerospace was privatised in 1980 by the incoming Conservative government of Margaret Thatcher. Back in the private sector, the company was subject to market discipline and, as before nationalisation, could bid for government project money. The first British aerospace aircraft from Kingston was the naval version of the Harrier, which was delivered to the Fleet Air Arm in 1979. The Sea Harrier was designed to be flown from the new Invincible class of carrier when modified by the addition of a ski jump at the end of its flight deck. The ski jump had been invented in 1973 and built into carriers. By inclining the flight path of the aircraft upwards, it improved takeoff performance and allowed a heavier load to be lifted from the flight deck, paradoxically at a reduced launch speed. The true value of the Harrier came to be recognised during the Falklands conflict of 1982, which marked a return to expeditionary warfare. Sea Harriers of the Royal Navy and Harriers of the RAF served 8,000 miles from the UK in support of the British task force. During the conflict, 42 Harriers flew 1,600 sorties in the extreme weather of the South Atlantic. The Harrier had been designed as a ground attack and reconnaissance aircraft, but in the Falklands it performed extremely well in air-to-air combat. Although outnumbered nearly 5-1 by faster Argentine Mirage jets, the Harriers scored 23 victories with no losses in air-to-air combat, although 2 were lost to ground fire and 4 in accidents. A key lesson of the Falklands conflict was the value of having floating airfields in the absence of dedicated air bases. Carriers allowed the Harriers to operate close to the action, providing air cover for both the troops and the fleet, exactly as the prescient post-1957 strategic rethink at Kingston had predicted. In December 1982, Margaret Thatcher visited BAE Kingston in recognition of the crucial role the Harrier had played in the Falklands victory. She was introduced to Ralph Hooper, its designer, and the man on whom the mantle of Sidney Cam had now fallen. Trade union officials refused to meet her. Her reception amongst the shop floor workers was mixed. There were a lot of folded arms. But she also received spontaneous rounds of applause from other staff as she walked through the factory. The P-1216 was a secret Kingston project supported by the RAF and Royal Navy for a supersonic, advanced, short takeoff and vertical landing fighter. Of a remarkable design, it was not, however, favoured for funding by the British Aerospace Board. For by now, due to the soaring costs of aircraft projects, only international collaborations were considered. The P-1216 remained a drawing board aircraft and another what-if of British aviation. In the 1980s, agreement was reached between British Aerospace and McDonnell Douglas to jointly develop a second generation of advanced Harriers. This became the largest Anglo-US aircraft project of all time. The Aviate-B was developed for the US Marines. It has a larger wing and is partly constructed of carbon fibre, giving it a lower weight and more payload carrying ability. The Aviate-B saw action during both Gulf Wars, acting in support of ground and sea forces. Kingston's part in the joint venture with McDonnell Douglas was to be the lead UK site for design. 50% of the airframe was made at BAE factories, with final assembly at Kingston and Dunsfold. The Harrier II also went into service with the RAF, replacing first-generation aircraft. In 2011, the coalition government decided to decommission HMS Ark Royal and the Harrier fleet following the economic crisis of 2008. Leaving the country unable to respond to another Falklands-type situation for at least a decade. The Harrier is still in service with the US Marines and the Italian and Spanish navies, some 50 years after the first flight of the P-11-27. Although much enhanced, it is fundamentally the same aircraft developed by the original Kingston team. In 1979, the Hawk was adopted as the aircraft to be used by the Red Arrows. So it remains to this day, although spectators at shows do not necessarily make the connection between the aircraft and its roots in Kingston. In 1981, the US Navy selected a version of the Hawk, the T-45 Goshawk, to be its training aircraft. The adoption by the US of a second Kingston jet was a great coup and led to another joint project with McDonnell Douglas.